So you may wonder, what exactly is systemic racism? Well, I'll show you an example. Imagine a foot race between a black person and a white person. While the goal is the same distance for both, the white person gets a head start and the black person has to be waiting until they're told to go. This is an example of systemic racism. Black students are 3 times as more likely to be suspended than white students for the exact same infractions. Blacks only hold 2.6% of the nation's wealth compared to Caucasians, who hold 90% of the nation's wealth.
My name is El-Amin, and I am the Imam of Masjid An-Nur in Minneapolis. Yes, racism has affected me personally. I think a number of ways. The most common thing I think that I recall, especially as I was in school, I thought that some of my teachers would favor certain students, white students particularly, over some of the African American students, and particularly in 5th grade, which was something that I think I still hold with me all these years later, just until other things as I've grown older. I've understood direct racism, somebody calling me, a nigger, as well as systemic racism where, it just costs me more to insure my vehicle and my home in the neighborhood I live in, so redlining, they call that. I think that it is, it's an issue when an individual person dislikes someone else because they're a different race. That's a serious issue. But it's criminal and malice when the system or the law is set up to favor one group over another group. I think that there has been some ebb and flow, but it's always been there. I think it's always been a fight, an argument, a conversation, in the public spectrum to really try to combat it, and it takes, it's very slippery, so it takes different forms over time. It's not just in one way that it happens. So yeah, I think it's there. I think it's always been there, but again, it does change forms depending on what we're dealing with. I think as long as human beings are on this earth, they will find a way to discriminate with one another. I think we will find periods of time when things won't be as bad as others, or if we go in certain places where things may be worse than others. I think that it will be there because that's part of the human condition. So I don't ever see a time on earth where these issues are not issues. I think this is gonna be a continuing process, but so I think that's a continue as long as this is gonna be something that we're gonna be left to contend with and to grapple with, so to speak. I think the idea of first being in conversation with each other. I think we have to have some good, meaningful interaction with each other, and I think that in some cases, we're going to be forced to come together, when there's an overarching threat, you know what I mean? If there is a president like we currently have who has said so many inflammatory things at so many different groups, whether it was to Hispanic or Latino, to women, African American. I think that in and of itself has provided a platform for these groups that might be having some infighting to actually stand together against that. You know what I mean? Though he's had a polarizing effect, he's also had an effect to unify different groups that perhaps wouldn't be if he wasn't viewed as a threat to everybody. No, I do not. I think that this expands to people of color, in general, and then then there's the whole gender question too. Female and how she's discriminated against in society as well. So no, I don't think that we're the only. I would describe the treatment of African Americans and historically and in the Americas as probably the most peculiar and inhumane treatment of any human beings in history. So that's how serious I would describe what happened to our people systemic over time through the system of slavery, where not that we were slaves, no, we were enslaved Africans, basically. You know what I mean? So there's a difference. Yeah, I mean, people. There's a whole historical process of people being very inhumane to each other. I mean, the Jews were discriminated against. The Native Americans, even the land that we sit in right now, Minnesota, the land that we sit in. I mean, this actually was occupied by somebody else, and through what they call manifest destiny, where they felt there was their God-given right to come and cultivate this basically and take from people, the natives who have been here. That of itself is, historically the ways that Native Americans have been discriminated against. But but it's been, we come to this country, we look at the history of this country, better put, the Catholics were discriminated against, the Irish, they had their whole thing going. And matter of fact, the whole idea of America was it wasn't about civil rights and all stuff. It was about religious freedoms. It was about the freedom to believe the way that you wanted to believe, and that's the foundation historically for America even being born as a nation. So yeah, so it comes out. It was a response to discrimination. You know what I mean? Yeah. But we brought a lot of that also with us too. I think that it is systemic racism comes down to, in my view, it comes down to an individual who it's like from a personal standpoint that I don't like you because you're this, you're that, whatever that this or that means. You know what I mean? Whether it's race, religion, whatever. Yeah. And but systemic racism requires a conspiracy, okay? Meaning that all the people in my group, it being the dominant group, we're going to conspire together to say everybody who don't look like, reflect who we are like this here, we're going to impose burdens on them that we don't have to go through. And one of the biggest places that we find it is in the prison industrial complex. People are going to prison. I mean, we're the richest nation in the world, the most quote-unquote advanced nation in the world, but we lock up the most people. And I mean, all the people we lock up, is dwarfs everybody combined. I mean, there's something that is terribly wrong about that. If people would just stop and just, think about that. Out in the land of plenty, it's so many people behind bars. You know what I mean? I remember historically, for example, from a cultural standpoint, there used to be a thing where early on, they didn't want African Americans to gather in groups. They thought that they would conspire against the slave master. Now you see it to where it was a thing where if they see more than 2 or 3 people gathering, they can consider you a gang on the street. And that's probable cause to stop you. Even though you all with your guys, y'all come from, you know what I mean? Yeah.
So now you may be wondering, what exactly can you do to help spread change? We can continue to stand up to racial injustice that's happening all around us every single day, even if it's not happening directly to us. We can continue to have our own voices be heard instead of always having somebody else speak for us, like Colin Kaepernick or Bernie Sanders. So what can we do? We can be the generation that instills change for the future.